So Japan was closed for a couple of centuries, and then all of a sudden Matthew Perry arrived, and in theory they shouldn't have been able to communicate the treaties because they couldn't speak the same language. Well, in fact, Matthew Perry wasn't the first Westerner to arrive in Japan. Of course, the Dutch had their settlement in Nagasaki, so a few Dutch could speak Japanese. And there was a couple other nationalities who went to Japan. For instance, von Siebold is probably one of the most famous. He was a botanist who went in the 1820s, had his own family, Japanese family there, but eventually got arrested and deported for having maps. He was accused of spying. And before von Siebold, there was the Russians under Golarov. Golarov was a naval commander who was shipwrecked in Japan, and he was arrested before being deported. And there was a few other people like this who arrived in Japan, but they were all arrested and deported. But in the 1840s, there was a British man called Ranald MacDonald. Not Ronald McDonald, Ranald MacDonald. And he'd always wanted to go to Japan, so he pretended to be shipwrecked. And instead of being deported straight away, his love of the culture and knowledge of the culture actually gained him a few favours. For instance, he was held up in prison and employed to teach Japanese English. Now this was becoming particularly more desirable because of the number of American and British ships arriving in Nagasaki and patrolling Japanese waters. Now he was left in isolation for the most part, and he only taught a handful of Japanese people English, but these people served as the shogun's interpreters when Perry arrived. And on the other hand, the Americans received a castaway. He was named Nakahama Manjiro, and he was just a teenager when his fishing boat was knocked off course and he was picked up by an American fishing vessel. So this was in 1941, but he couldn't return to Japan because of the isolationist policy, so he went to America, was schooled in America, and made quite a bit of money in the gold rush. Then, in the 1850s, he made the risky adventure to go back to Japan, and after being interrogated for a little while, he was allowed to stay and was hired as one of the shogun's advisors, and he served as the American interpreter during the negotiation. But he wasn't the first Japanese person to reach America. For instance, in the 1830s there was Otokichi. Now he was a castaway who eventually was enslaved by a Native American tribe for a while before being handed over to a businessman who wanted to use him to open up Japan. But this failed, he wasn't allowed back home, and in the journey he visited London and helped create a Japanese Bible and all sorts. And of course, going back to the early 17th century and late 16th century, there were more people who made the journey from Japan to the West and vice versa. But without these people, maybe Japan would never have been opened.